presentation. It's so nice to hear it in Spanish. It's such a lovely language. I'm sorry I cannot speak it, but it sounded wonderful. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the research we do about sustainability and in marine urban areas. The students who have followed my workshop know already a little bit of what I will be presenting, but I'll try also to provide some new perspective. And I'll start this presentation introducing a little bit the University of Padova, so that you are all familiar with that. So I was telling you that I'm going first to introduce, but I'm not proceeding. Okay, maybe like this. I'm going to introduce you Padova University and tell you a little bit about it. So Padova University is one of the oldest universities in Italy. It was founded in 1222. And nowadays it's one of the largest universities that we have, not as large as this, which is massive, but our size are a little bit smaller. And we have over 7,000 students, including bachelor and master students, of which more than 7,000 are international students. There is about 2,700 professors, staff, and as many technical and administrative staff. We also have many postdocs, about 2,000 PhD students in all the university, and one excellent school. And the university is highly ranked in terms of particular research or also international contacts, and it ranked the first in the census of public university in Italy for the past year. As many universities in Italy, they are diffuse university embedded within historical cities. So we don't have really this concept of the campus that's more for modern, but because our universities are so old, they tend to be spread out in the city. So this is a typical setup of the University of Padova. There are 32 departments and 21 research centers that are scattered in the city. And the university is a broad university, so it covers, of course, social science, humanities, physical science, engineering, and life science and medicine. We are pushing a lot for having degrees in English, particularly at the master level. And currently there are over 54 degrees that are taught entirely in English. I still struggle moving. Okay. The other characteristic of Padova University that's not typical of other Italian universities, more unique to Padova, is that it has a diffuse campus. That means it covers the whole Veneto region, and we have structures that are up in the mountain, from a structure like Chioggia that is here on the south side of Venice Laguna. Padova is here, so it's about 50 kilometers, about 1 hour drive from Padova to the campus. So you can have an idea. And these are all other institutes. It's about 18 institutes spread around. And that is because the institute try to address local needs, and so they have a different focus depending on when they are located. So I'm based at the university in Chioggia, and our focus is clearly marine and coastal science. And in Chioggia, we have two main buildings. One is the teaching facility, that's also the museum. I probably need to admit the people here and there. Well, okay, you do that, okay. Okay. And the museum has an historical collection that's very relevant, and the master degree is all taught in English. While on this little other island, there is the research facility, the historical station Umberto D'Ancona, where we have some boats and laboratory space. The mission of Chioggia, as I was saying, is to address local needs and address complex environmental challenges related to the sea. And we try to do that in both research and innovation. also capacity building and education. We are a university, but also we have strong linkages with the public authorities and the government. So we also try to feed into that. And we try to have research lines that have an impact on the real world and on the local society. So the main research lines that we carry on at the station are mainly around topics that have to do with food security and sustainability. Chioggia is one of the main fishing areas in Italy, one of the two main fishing ports. Marine biodiversity monitoring and conservation, the climate change and coastal resilience, and bio-based innovation for, let's say, holistic One Health application. I'll make some example of some of the research lines that are from different colleagues that work at the Institute. For example, the food security and sustainability, some of the colleagues that lead this kind of research are Professor Mazzoldi, Professor Barause, and they work a lot with the local fishery community, for example, to find ways and techniques to enhance the sustainability of their fishing practices, or also to help them mitigate the negative impact of some non-indigenous species. I was mentioning to the student this morning that at the moment we have a huge problem with the invasion of the crab that I know is a big fishery resource for some areas in the world, but for us it's been a massive impact, destroying most of the traditional fishery practices, and they work together with the fishermen to find solutions for that. A second group is more focused on biotechnological application for various types of approaches. This is an example. Venice lagoon has a lot of non-indigenous species, and this is another pest that is invading the lagoons. Ulva australis has gone in recently, and it's now invading the whole lagoon. And our colleagues found out that the species has some enzymes that can have a potential use for several disorders like obesity. Now it's not my research, or diabetes. And so they are trying to find ways to collect the species from the environment and use it for this bio-based application. So it's kind of win-win situation where you remove a pest from the environment to produce some valuable products. Another line of research is from some colleagues that work with tunicates. And they have two main research lines. One, they are trying to use tunicates for producing very, very high quality nanocellulose materials that can have application, biomedical applications. So they are trying to use them. They grow a lot in the lagoon. Sometimes they are pests, and again, it's a way of using them. And the other, they use, there is this species, Botryllus schroessleri, that has a very fast turnover, regenerative and degenerative cycle, and they are studying the species to understand degenerative processes also in human, and to facilitate study about how to counteract these degenerative processes. And then we go to topics that are more close to mine, that have to do with eco-engineering, coastal resilience. So we work, for example, on designing restoration and conservation measure, on designing bio-enhanced construction materials, low footprint coastal defenses, and all we try to use a circular economy principle and to have a strong contact with the local community that have a lot of local ecological knowledge. This is my area of research, and the seminar will go on this research line. So I'll start introducing you the concept of marine urban areas, and we will see how much of the ocean is urban. Then I'll move on what is restoration, particularly in an urbanized context. Urbanization is growing, and that's why we try to work with restoration within an urbanized context. We will see how nature-based solution can help full restoration, even in this highly urbanized context. And that works if they address concrete societal problems. And I'll make a couple of examples that have to do with our research in Venice Laguna and the Adriatic Sea that have to do with breeding of grey infrastructure and hybrid salt marsh restoration. And then we will have some conclusive remarks. So what's the status of our ecosystem? Well, we are losing natural ecosystems. There have been documentation that over time we are lost more than 30% of the seagrasses globally, of 50% of the coastal wetlands, 75% of the coral reefs are highly threatened, and at least 25% are highly degraded. We have lost over 85% of the oyster reef globally that have been entirely fished out. And the estimated loss of ecosystem services from all these losses have been estimated to be over 10 billion euros, trillion euros per year. So it's a huge loss. While we are losing natural habitats, we are expanding artificial structures. We have run out of space on land and we are building into the sea, and we are turning our ocean into like a concrete buildings. We have done recent estimates that have been published 2 or 3 years ago about what's the footprint of all these constructions in the sea. And it came out that there are, in 2018, there were already 32,000 square kilometers of artificial coastline that modify an entire area of about 1 to 3.4 million square kilometers globally. That corresponds to about 1.5% of the global exclusive economic zone. If you want to have an idea of how much is that, that is more or less the same surface that is covered globally by seagrasses, mangroves, and salt marshes together. So it's huge area, okay? And it's improving, it's increasing. Our estimate, based on real project that had been approved, is that from 2018 to 2028, the sprawl of marine infrastructure would have increased by 50 to 70%, so a massive increase. And that is due to offshore industry, all the energy, port activities, all the industry related to the construction of man-made islands, all these activities, and also coastal defense, like this type of structures for coastal defense. We will talk a lot about them later. On land, we know we are much more aware about this problem, and in fact, urban ecology has developed on land, and there are all theories about urban ecology. And nowadays, our managing of terrestrial urban environments is much more careful. We care about green spaces, green buildings. There is a lot of thinking about green infrastructure. In the sea, we have gone much behind. All this has gone unnoticed, and there is not a real science about these types of environment. But at the moment, things are changing, and there is interest for more active restoration actions, even in the ocean. And that, of course, has been facilitated by activities like the United Nations Decade for Ecosystem Restoration, or the United Nations Decade for Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. And in Europe, I spoke a lot with the students about the just new approved nature restoration law that will push the restoration of at least 20% of both terrestrial and marine habitats. And by 2030, I think that's a little bit ambitious, and by 2050, we should be able to restore all the habitats that are in need for restoration. Okay, so exactly what is ecological restoration? The Society for Ecological Restoration defines it as the process of assisting the recovery on ecosystems that have been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. And in general, we tend to identify two types of action, what we call the passive restoration. That's the capability of the system to naturally recover once you act removing the drivers of the loss. So the typical example is a marine protected area. You enforce it, you remove some of the pressure, and the system should be able to naturally recover. In some cases, that's really difficult because the recovery is slow, or because it's impeded by societal or other ecological challenges, and there is a need for more active intervention. That could be through active habitat creation, transplants, enhanced recruitment, whatever. There can be many different approaches. In general, the goal is the reference is generally towards historical, ideally existing healthy state. That's the traditional way in which interpret restoration. However, in many cases, we may not know even what is the past, or the past that before impact is so far away that we have lost track of it. Or in other cases, a return to the historical state is unlikely, for example, where we have had urbanization or invasive species, or even under the pressure of climate change. And in fact, we have now introduced the concept of novel ecosystem. Well, Hobbes has introduced the concept of novel ecosystem that I think offers a very interesting framework for working within a highly urbanized environment. The idea here is that you can still restore, but probably to something that's not necessarily the past, but it's something that may be different. It can still have a degree of novelty, but it's still acceptable. That leads to an interpretation of what is restoration that for me is broader than what normally is the view of restoring into the past. And to me, restoration, and also to many other colleagues, restoration is a broader umbrella that comprise several types of approaches and intervention that could be used to redefine functional and healthy ecosystem, whether they are the natural ones, or even if they have a high degree of novelty, or to anticipate in some cases, or even mitigate rather than compensate for damage to ecosystem. This is an example from a city in Kuwait that has been basically built with a preventative type of restoration. So rather than impacting on the coral reef on the coast, the city has been developed into a desert in the background, so that basically they were recreating more marine environment into a less valuable habitat rather than destroying the coral reef on the coast. A lot of this type of interventions, particularly those that are in a kind of urbanized novel context, go under what we tend to call nature-based solution. Every time you have you don't see the title, so the slides, but never mind. Okay, the title here is nature-based solution. I don't have anything here. I don't know. You are seeing it there. Okay. It's not a problem for me. It's more a problem for you. Okay. Okay. So you can see that. I don't know why there. Maybe I just have to push this. Okay, and that's it. I think I've done it. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So nature-based solution is a term that was defined in 2008 by the World Bank. And of course, it refers to the sustainable management and use of natural resources to tackle societal challenges. In reality, there has been a huge amount of different definition of the terms, but the core ideas behind all this definition is that the nature-based solution is any solution that is inspired by nature, that faces societal challenges, is efficient and effective, and it provides multiple benefits, including some biodiversity gains. I'm a strong supporter of nature-based solution because I believe, as I spoke to the students last day, they know my philosophy behind, I believe that nature-based solution can fuel large-scale restoration, even in highly urbanized context systems. And this is an example of Venice Lagoon, which is an amazing case study This is Venice. This is the Arsenal, so it's the core of Venice. And just in front of it, you can see restored marshes. And these restored marshes are used as an alternative nature-based approach to address some of the challenges related to coastal erosion and flood risks in Venice Lagoon. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that. I particularly think that nature-based solution at the moment can be particularly valuable in coastal defense. Okay, so the challenge here that we are facing is the problem that urban waterfronts are becoming more and more fragile system. They are prone to flood, and they often have a high erosion and flood risk. This was a paper by the group of Robert Nichols from some years ago, showing the amount of population living in low elevation coastal zones that are at risk from severe flood risk. And when we mean severe, we mean like or New Orleans with Katrina, okay, with lots of fatalities. And we are going to face in the future an increasing risk. And of course, also all these erosion and flood risk leads to damage not only for people, but also to infrastructure, tourism, properties, so assets. So there, of course, it's a problem. And so far, the most common approach to this problem has been hard engineering for coastal protection. So this is the North Adriatic shoreline. It's our barrier against coastal erosion. And all this gray infrastructure is generally not planned, particularly in the past, has not been planned in a particularly ecological sensitive way. And it generally has very high carbon footprint. Often it's concrete based. It has high costs, high environmental impacts, and in general, poor ecological performance. They tend to be corridors that facilitate non-indigenous species, while often they're not colonized by native species. Furthermore, a lot of this infrastructure has been created particularly during the 70s, 80s, 90s. So a lot of this infrastructure is approaching aging globally. They have a certain age, 40, 50 years. After that, they need, and then with climate change, they are no longer designed in the right way for the sea level rise. Okay, so the World Bank has estimated that the current infrastructure is more and more inadequate to protect the coastline, and it would need extreme maintenance and upgrade to meet the safety levels that are needed. And they estimated the cost of more than $18 trillion for upgrading currently aging infrastructure. So cities and waterfronts need to find alternative solutions that are more sustainably, both ecologically, but also economically and in general, more sustainable. The idea here is that many biogenic habitats provide this coastal protection abilities. And actually, if we have all these problems around the coast, it's exactly because we destroyed in the past all these habitats that were protecting the coast. A lot of coral reef regions that had coral reefs have destroyed some of their coral reefs, for example, for building or for other reasons. And then once they, of course, were not defended any longer, have replaced them with breakwaters, concrete breakwaters or stone breakwaters with very high costs. And that's completely inefficient and unsustainable. Of course, here is an example from temperate areas. We don't have coral reefs that are probably the best coastal protection that you can have. But also in our system, a lot of the ecosystem provide coastal protection, okay? Salt marshes are some of the best, and they have been shown to protect the coast even under high storm surge. Seagrass meadows, well, they contribute to the defense. Mussel beds, oyster reefs, other types of reefs, sand dunes, okay? And so the idea is that we can try to build a nature-based alternative to this gray infrastructure by restoring or engaging with some of these natural features that we have lost. And this would have an advantage because we should be able to achieve the coastal and marine infrastructure that we need, but in a more green and sustainable way. Therefore, with benefits for nature in terms of conservation and with benefits for the society that will benefit from a healthier environment. So what do we mean with nature-based solution? In terms of coastal defense, the approaches that we can follow for more ecologically engineered shoreline follow a gradient that goes from the hardest options, so where we still need a hard infrastructure. You have a harbor, you need to protect it. You need like a seawalls, okay, solid ones. To entirely soft actions where you rely only exclusively on nature that is restored. This is an example with oysters and a marsh restored, both restored because they tend to facilitate each other and have a better performance. Probably the majority of the intervention, or where a lot of us think it's the real future, is in the middle, okay? Because this type of action work well, but not everywhere. And they can be difficult to set up where you need most them, for example, in the most exposed or eroding areas. Well, this would like to avoid and move them to here. The hybrid projects are projects where you reduce the amount of infrastructure that you need, but you still have a little bit that enforces the action, and part of the protection is taken by the restored habitat at the end, for example, behind. This is a typical example of what is called a living shoreline. You have a little structure in front and a marsh restored on the back. And this is more or less the same concept, for example, of restoration of marshes in Venice Lagoon. Okay. Said that we probably work more into this area, or at least I'm trying to work more into this area. I will try to illustrate you examples from the two, let's say, areas. One, the greening of grey infrastructure, and one more here in the middle of hybrid projects. Okay, greening of grey infrastructure basically means trying to design this infrastructure in a more sustainable way that mimics nature, structures that have a little bit less impacts, that support some kind of life, wildlife. They may support desired ecosystem services that could be, I don't know, for example, some species that could be filtering the water and addressing pollution problems, or maybe like here you have structures that are built for recreational purposes. The idea, how you, and the concept, sorry, getting behind, the concept is trying to have a multifunctional structure that make their function, primary one, coastal protection, but they also combine some other type of functions, like, for example, water quality control or maintenance. To be able to do this, what is needed is to be able to link some kind of structural elements in the constructions to desired function that you want to have. You want to enhance, like they did in Seattle, the productivity and the growth of seaweeds. So for example, you could try to build a structure that are permeable more to light and allow more light to get into the sea and facilitate seaweed growth. You want to have, I don't know, more native species, for example, you may try to create a structure that mimic more the natural environment in the region. So the problem here is to be able to understand what you want. Okay, that's what you want, but what you have to do to get what you want. Okay, that's the science behind. And sometimes that's not yet, I think, super clear. The majority of the research so far in green engineering, we were discussing this morning about this, has focused particularly on the links between habitat quality and complexity and the biodiversity that can be associated to these habitats. A lot of artificial structures tend to be very smooth structure that don't have a lot of diversity of habitats, while natural environments tend to have a greater complexity. So a lot of people think that if we design a structure that have a greater habitat complexity, we will gain more species and more biodiversity. And these are some examples. This is the Sydney Living Seawall Project. These are, I don't remember, I think they are from the UK, from Louise, I think. This is in a concrete seawall. This is, no, this is the Louise one. I don't remember this one, might be from another company. This is from the Seattle waterfront. And the problem with these approaches is that there is not such a clear universal relationship or single solution. And not always they work. We had a long discussion this morning about that. I want to provide you evidence from one of our projects within the World Harbor project. We tried to test the same type of tiles that had increasing habitat complexity, and they were exactly the same material. They were built in Australia and shipped all around the world, and we all tested them. And the outcomes of this study were completely different. We had some target species that we wanted to enhance, and in some environments, it was fantastic. Those tiles worked amazingly. In others, they didn't work or even did worse than traditional concrete. So this conclusion from this work is that really we need site-specific approaches. Actually, I also think that in some areas, they don't work very well because the limitation is not so much habitat complexity or the quality of the habitat. This was work done by one of my students in our region. Our region is one of those where these approaches don't work. And I had this student trying to understand some of these. And we compared natural structure of different habitat complexity. So we have areas with boulder fields and nearby vertical cliffs. And cliffs can be considered similar to a seawall for the type of structures that they have, while boulder fields can be considered similar to breakwater as a type of complexity. And then we studied both the three-dimensional structure and the type of biota that was associated. And what came out is that actually boulder fields and breakwater have a similar structure, more or less really similar, but their biota is completely different. While, for example, seawalls and breakwaters, they actually have very different structures. One is smooth and the other is complex, but they have similar biota. So it's actually the structure doesn't seem to be what really matters here. And we calculated that more or less it was explaining about 20% only of the differences between artificial structure and natural reefs. So we are missing 80%. What we don't know what is the other 80% that makes this structure don't work. So currently, I'm trying to answer what other important factors are we missing? And that's a research line in my lab at the moment. And we carry out this research within a big national project that is this National Biodiversity Future Center project that has funded this first innovation center for biodiversity, including marine biodiversity at a national level. And it involves more than 2,000 researchers nationally working on different topics. I'm particularly involved in what is called the Spoke One, that's focused on monitoring. And this monitoring, the idea is that we integrate different monitoring techniques, evolving or traditional ones and evolving ones, to address two main questions. One, to understand better the sensibility and vulnerability of marine ecosystems to ongoing climate changes and other stressors, and to identify innovative strategies to preserve and restore these ecosystems. And within this project, what we did, we integrated, we involved several colleagues doing different types of monitoring in a larger scale monitoring of all a series of sites around Italy. And we were able to also include the 8 ports that authorized us to go there and dive and collect a lot of information. You think that's easy, but actually it's extremely difficult. And a lot of the limitation for working in urban areas is that you don't have the permitting to do this kind of research. You are not allowed to dive I don't know how we managed to get this permitting. We worked 1 year, and I'm very proud of that. I think that has been my main achievement in the past 2 years, getting the permitting. And we were able to dive, we were able to collect all sorts of things. We were able to use benthic chambers and everything. And we also used the other types of techniques, for example, environmental DNA, because we wanted to compare different methods, because environmental DNA is very good because you can do it from outside. So you can use it even if you don't get permitting to dive in a port. So we wanted to understand the different pictures that we were getting using different methods. And oh, by the way, this work is led by my postdoc, Robin Gauff, and my PhD student, Giada Riva, who have done an amazing work here. This has disappeared, this slide. I don't know what happened. Okay, it has animation. So you can see it's done by my student because it's much cooler than those that are done by me. It is animation. So this has been done by Giada. So we had this beautiful camper, and actually also we went a month all around Italy with a camper that was transformed at the lab, and we were estimating various species composition, community structure, also physical parameters, but also ecosystem function like benthic productivity, biomass, or benthic metabolism, like using benthic chambers. And I was anticipating to the student this morning, some of the outcomes, they are particularly interesting, and they were completely different from all our expectation. And that really suggests that we don't have a very good understanding of what structures the assemblages in urban areas. And I think that's a big area where we have to work, because if we don't fill in those gaps, we will not be able to design very effective eco-engineering approaches, or at least eco-engineering approaches that work for the context where we want them to work. The second area of research is about the other extreme, okay? So it's more nature-based solution or hybrid options. So there, you're not working on hard infrastructure, but you're trying really to restore the natural habitats to help in coastal defense. And as I was telling, Venice Lagoon is an amazing example of that. So I'll tell you a little bit more about Venice Lagoon. It's a large lagoon, but this morning I discovered it's very little compared to any lagoons you have here. But for us, it's huge. Okay, for the European standards, it's one of the largest in Europe. And it's full of islands. It's highly inhabited, and then there is a huge amount of tourism, like you have no idea how the problem is with the tourism. And over the centuries, it's been really transformed, and there have been all sorts of changes, including rivers diverted out of the lagoon, complete control of the hydrodynamics of the lagoon. And while the lagoon was transformed, at the same time, there were significant attempts to try to maintain at least its basic nature and characteristic and functioning as natural as possible. So the most valuable and iconic habitat in the lagoon is salt marshes. That's the equivalent of your mangroves in a temperate environment. They are a highly valuable environment, but they are highly degraded and deteriorated. And over the centuries, the engineers have estimated that there have been a loss of more than 80% of them, mostly because of sediment starvation, partially deliberate to maintain the navigational channel free of sediment. And recently, the whole process has been accelerated by climate change, sea level rise, non-indigenous species, and all of that. And the problem is that this has become a problem because the erosion of the marshes in the lagoon, this is the wave environment, energy environment in the lagoon, simulated for the 1600s when there were lots of salt marshes. So the wave environment is very calm, and while with eroded marshes, the problem is that there is a significant wave action, which creates even more marsh erosion. So it creates a mechanism by which you lose more and more marshes. So the local authorities wanted to address really this problem and wanted to get back a more natural situation so that they were also sorting out these problems of erosion and of excess water, energy, and flood. So they came up with I think a relatively smart solution. So they started this large-scale soil marsh restoration projects in the 80s, and they basically were they needed to dredge sand for the navigational channels to maintain the navigational channelry, and they have reused the sediment to build again some of the islands and the marshes in the lagoon and recreate the height needed for them. I know it's far from perfect. We could discuss about the fact that it's keeping eroding and rebuilding, eroding and rebuilding, but it's a really difficult management to take in the lagoon. And now some of these effects have been even amplified by the construction of the Mose barriers, those barriers that close Venice lagoon when there is a high water and protect the lagoon and all the surrounding from flood every time. And I know it's not perfect, but it's a really, in the end, to me, it proves to be a decent approach. And it has restored so far more than 11 square kilometers of marshes, particularly in this area where a lot of them had been removed. The technical performance is good, and they have also found that the societal performance has been, the societal outcomes have been good, but there were not many studies about the ecological outcomes. So when I arrived there, I said, okay, that's a good area of research. And I had another part of my team that started working on these marshes. And we had this large-scale sampling of different types of restored marshes in the lagoon. We had some restore, what we call the restore type 1. That's a more natural friendly way of restoring them with less contiguous barriers that allow the formation of creeks in the marsh. And the restore type 2 is a more rigid type. They have a very rigid edge that don't allow a lot of connectivity between the sea and the marsh. And we estimated the effects in terms of different types of outcomes, and we had multiple restored sites. We wanted also to see what was the consistency of outcomes between different restored sites. Now the paper is under review. We also had already done the revisions that they asked. Let's cross fingers it goes on. The lesson that we learned from that project is that the restored marshes are not perfect, okay? They're not identical. And they have a high degree of novelty compared to what is natural. By the way, what is natural in Venice Lagoon, we could also talk about that because it's what doesn't have obvious recent manipulations. The restored marshes have also a larger site scale variability in some of the outcomes, larger than what we measure in the natural marshes. But at the same time, where vegetation is restored, for example, in the mid-marsh, the function is similar to the natural one. So the outcome are good, for example, in terms of soil carbon stock or macrobenthos support, even in a relatively short time, in 15, 20 years. And we also found that the more natural edge design actually helps matching more closely the average natural condition. And this is where we are working now at the moment. So we have a couple of projects with the local authorities. Sorry, I have to go back to try to design more natural edge design. This is one with my student Serena De Laurentiis. She worked together with this company, the Dasa Manera, to try to produce a more sustainable alternative to the rock type of breakwaters that were creating these barriers, particularly around the restoration type 2 marshes. And this material is made 70% with locally recycled shellfish material, and the design is a biomimetic of natural reefs. And these ties have been compared with other traditional material used for these edges, and the study is still ongoing. I'll let you know. But Well, I have to say that maybe the performance, it was a little bit less successful than what we were hoping. It's exactly the problem that I was telling before, that not always this green engineering works exactly as you would like. So what I've been trying to say is that, okay, on one side, urban areas are expanding. It's kind of unavoidable. We will keep expanding into the sea. And I don't think there is much we can do about that. At the same time, developments also concentrate investments. And I'll get there to the last slide, because we think there is a great opportunity into that. And there is also a willingness, at least in some countries or in some places, to think about this development in a little bit more sustainable way. So we could try to be more proactive and be a little bit more nature inclusive in all these developments, and have a little bit more thinking about what could be done to make these developments, well, not entirely not impacting, because that's impossible, but a little bit less impacting, or at least with multifunctional addressing more function than just a single one, and trying to produce some kind of benefits, at least for the society, if not trying to offsetting some of the losses on biodiversity. So to be able to do that, we think we have some knowledge gaps that we need to fill in. This is again work by my PhD student, Serena. Now she's postdoc in my lab, she just finished. And she ran a meta-analysis of different nature-based salt marsh restoration studies. And what she found is a huge variability in the outcomes of these studies. And what she found is that, first of all, there is a lack of standard design criteria and performance indicators. So it's also very difficult to say what was a successful project or not, because we don't have standards to follow. And everybody evaluates things in different way, monitors them in different way. And there, I think in those 34 papers, she had more than 100 different indicators that were used to evaluate success. So it's huge, it's possible. And there is also a large variability in the outcomes, depending on how, where, and when restoration was conducted. And that's also, and we don't understand very well what drives all these variabilities. So that's also a gap that we need to fill in, because being able to, variability means limitation in being able to predict what will be the outcomes, which information that managers want to know. If they make a restoration, they want you to tell them more or less how the system will evolve. But if each site does different things, even in the same environment, then it becomes a little bit more difficult, and that creates a limitation in the scalability. So future challenges. Well, I think, first of all, a lot of studies are done at a very small scale. And that creates difficulties again, because the knowledge you get is difficult to interpret at the right scale. So I think we need large scale restoration actions that allow us to learn from those interventions. Certainly, Europe is taking this way. Not all the interventions will be perfect, but at least we will have the opportunity to learn even from mistakes. We should try to understand and prioritize the benefits that we want to achieve from all of this, and being able to rigorously estimate the outcomes at achieving those benefits. At the moment, I think there is a huge problem there. And as I was saying, everybody estimates success in a different way, and that doesn't allow a transparent or rigorous assessment. And we also need targets, regulation, and certification to limit the risk of greenwashing that are particularly high in the sector of green engineering. The idea is that if you drill a couple of holes in a seawall, there will be a sustainable structure, and that's absolutely not the case. Okay, so we need to clarify when a structure is a green structure and when it is not. The other area where I think we should work is to clearly align restoration to societal needs. I think that's a very important component of the work. And again, I think Venice, under this point of view, is a very successful example. So they have, for example, realized that there are limitations in the way these marshes are built, and the local authorities have been trying to create designs that are more sustainable and more nature-based. And this was a project by our colleague, Professor Barause and Luca Palmieri, where they tried to test a more nature-based type of edges for the marshes made of local wood. And that worked very well in the more sheltered areas of the lagoon. And in fact, now the authorities have scaled up this approach to the lagoon scale. But we are also aware that this approach doesn't work in the most exposed areas. So we just had this project funded by the European Union to try to test advanced design. It's Project Blue Shore, and we will try the combination of different eco-engineering elements. So this is the wood fascines that you have seen here, followed by oyster restoration and marsh stimulating elements. We will use some Bise elements. They are called, like, it's produced by the Dutch using a starch, potato starch, that facilitate marsh growth. And we believe that these three elements together will be able to create marsh edges that work better than the current ones, even in the most exposed areas of the lagoon. That's our hope. I will tell you in 3 years how this went. Finally, before we were talking about financing, if you remember, and that developments offer huge opportunity for financing. I was very lucky to be involved in this work group by, again, the Dutch colleague with whom I work a lot. There was also Carlos Duarte involved. And basically the idea behind this work was, how do we finance marine restoration? How do we finance all of that? And we kind of said, okay, the green offshore industry, like with all the wind, for example, production, or other types of green energy production that's all expanding into the ocean, is a sector that is growing massively. And they are more sensitive to environmental issues, and they will have a massive growth and massive income. And the calculation that was made, and often sometimes in the habitats where you expand the structure, you don't have a lot of other activities that fit very well. So you create habitats that in some way are potentially protected, but often they are desert and nothing goes back. So these areas could actually be reused or employed for large-scale restoration of some of the habitats that were lost. For example, oyster reefs that have been wiped out entirely from all the sedimentary environment, and that normally, if you try to restore in another sedimentary environment, are going to be thrown out after 10 minutes by normal fishery, while in these areas, probably not, because they are strongly controlled and the activity is not allowed. So the idea was, okay, we are expecting a massive exponential growth of the offshore green industry all over the world. This, for example, Europe has a huge target for that. And if you just allocate 1% of the global offshore wind investments, that would be enough to be able to restore millions of square kilometers of marine ecosystem. Also because restoring, for example, oyster reefs is not so expensive. So that's the kind of idea, well, as other ecosystems. We are looking at oyster reefs because on one side, they are easy to restore, and it's easier to restore them in coastal areas because they are clearly used for coastal defense and they are not fished out. But if you try to restore them from the other habitats where they used to be, the deeper one, really there is a problem with the fishery because they get fished out. Well, there could be opportunities to join these two types of activities. That's our proposal. So if you want to read that paper, it just came out. These are some of the projects that have supported the research over the years. I probably forgot a couple of them. And of course, behind there is all the group of my teams over the years. I've mentioned some of the students, but in general, it's an amazing team, very cooperative. that's it, more or less. I don't know how much time. Yeah, no, it was good.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Okay. I think we have time for the question and answer session. Tenemos tiempo para la sesión de preguntas y respuestas. No sé si aquí alguien quiere preguntar. En tanto en línea, recuerden que pueden escribirlo en el chat o también pueden levantar la mano de forma virtual y de ese modo hacer la pregunta. ¿Comentarios, preguntas aquí? Sí. You have one.
Doctor, thank you very much for your talk. I think first of all, congratulations. This is a massive work. And I'm kind of I'm a scientist and I only work with taxonomy. So my question is, how do you manage to work with such a huge number of phyla, the animals, and how do you face the taxonomy, impediment? Because probably you work with a lot of juveniles, and and I wonder, how do you manage to survive this problem? Because I'm working on a project in Bahamas, and we have that in seagrass, and we have that problem not just with my group, the echinoderms. We also have problems with all the rest of marine invertebrates.
Yeah, it's a real problem, you're right. And in fact, some of the researches that have included the taxonomies, they were always built whenever some good taxonomist was in my group, okay? So for example, in the past, I had one taxonomy of ascidians who were in my lab for about a year. And that year we used him a lot, focusing on that. That project I was telling you around Italy, there was Giada and Robin. So Robin is an amazing taxonomist. I mean, to be a taxonomist, you have to have the mentality. I'm real poor with taxonomy, but he's excellent. And he was able to cover very well a huge amount of invertebrates, a massive what he could do. And I trained Giada, so I sent her to courses to cover the seaweed part. So she's a little bit less experienced, and seaweeds are very difficult, but not everything is perfect, but we tried to do our best. On the other side, there is environmental DNA part. So that's the colleagues that are, and the problem is that, okay, with environmental DNA, you should be able to overcome some of this problem. But the reality is that a lot of the, I don't even know, I'm not an environmental DNA, but the barcoding, it doesn't associate to the right species. There are lots of problems with the identification. So that's absolutely an issue. Yeah. We don't expect to have been able to detect all species, but I think Robin and Giada together came out from that sampling with a database with more than 500 species. So they have been amazing. They have been absolutely amazing. I was the one who was doing the functions. So I was the Bentic chambers, which are super boring. You're just there for hours measuring.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, you must have taxonomy.
Gracias, doctor. ¿Alguna otra pregunta tenemos por acá? Si no, nos vamos en lo que se animan. Vamos para acá, we have a question online. Okay. Sarai Gomez asks, restoration actions involve different actors and jurisdictions. In these examples, what has been the role of decision makers and governments implementing these restoration strategies? And in these examples, what kind of regulations exist for the effective implementation of marine ecological restoration strategies?
Okay, for the Venice case study, the local governance is extremely sensitive to this issue, and the initiative has come out from them. So we also have a very good relationship with them, and they are those who asked us if we could have this kind of research project to test some of those more innovative nature-based actions, because I was explaining to the students is that in Italy often there are rules or laws that limit the capability that local authorities have to experiment with different innovative type of initiative, particularly the nature-based one. There are limitations, there are liability issues, so they often don't manage as managers to implement them. But if they can show through a research project that they work, then they can get back and say, well, we have the evidence that they work, so we can implement that.
Yeah.
So this also creates a very good collaboration between scientists and the authorities, because they have ideas, and they ask us to help them testing some of these ideas that are more innovative. So I think at the local scale, this is working very well. Some other national level actions have been stimulated again by the government, who has used some funding from the European Union exactly to fund restoration actions, and has involved into this some of the national environmental protection agencies at the national level, who then have involved scientists. For example, we are involved for the monitoring of some of these actions.
Okay.
So different actions could be led by different kind of governance actors, depending on whether they are made at the regional level or at the national level. I know that's quite complex, because it's two different kinds of control.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yes, it's very complex. Thank you so much, doctor. We have another question. ¿Tenemos otra pregunta por acá? No, ¿verdad? Okay. Maria Jimena, she says, good evening, doctor. I would like to know where we could read more about NBS for marine ecosystems and how we can follow the BIMINE project. It sounds very interesting.
I
don't know, BIMINE, the project? VIMINI?
Blue Shore? Which project?
No, isn't the, I guess,
no, I cannot see it.
Here it is.
Okay.
Just let me, which one? Because it shows in one of your...
VIMINE project. Okay.
VIMINE.
All right. VIMINE.
Maybe I didn't pronounce
Sorry, I didn't
correctly.
The VIMINE project, if you digit online, you see it. The project was finished a few years ago already, but now the action have been recognized. It's exactly the example that I was saying to you. So the local authorities thought that design would be a good one. So there was this link between Padova University and the local authorities. They applied for a project, a LIFE project, that are these European instruments to support actions, direct actions on the environment, of the benefit of the environment. They tested them on a large scale. They proved to be super effective. And then the local authorities could say, okay, they work. Now we can implement them at a larger scale. It would have not been possible that they were doing it themselves, because they would have never been, even the authorities are not authorized at the central level to do some of these things. It's interesting.
Yes.
The other question was about marine protected areas. That's not exactly my field, but there is lots of research around marine protected areas. I mean, in Italy, some of the people who lead this research are Simonetta Fraschetti or Paolo Guidetti, for example. They work a lot. So it's other colleagues. Okay.
Thank you so much, doctor. I think that's all. We don't have more questions. ¿Preguntas por acá? Chicos, chicas? No, ¿verdad? Okay. Okay, I think that's all, doctor. Thank you so much
Thank you
for being with us today.